People always said my daughter Ilara had her head in the clouds, but I was the one who worried about what was in them. My Ilara. To everyone else, she was the quiet girl who doodled not hearts, but complex molecular diagrams in her notebook margins. Her mother, Sarah, would sigh during our tense custody handoffs. David, it's just so boring. All those letters and numbers. C something, H something. Can't you get her into soccer? Anything? Even her teachers called her obsession with chemical formulas, rote memorization, a peculiar parlor trick without practical application. They didn't see what I saw. They didn't see her arranging her peas and carrots into the lattice structure of sodium chloride, whispering the name like an incantation. They didn't see her tracing H2O on a steamy car window, her face lit with a reverence most kids reserve for a new video game. They saw a weird hobby. She saw a blueprint for reality. I, on the other hand, saw the poetry in it. Where they saw a string of meaningless symbols, I saw my daughter decoding the universe's secret language. It wasn't boring. It was fundamental. It was the why behind the what, the recipe for rain and rock, and the very air we breathed. So I was the one who bought her the advanced chemistry textbooks, the one who helped her assemble a sprawling model of a glucose molecule that took over our entire dining room table for a week. It's how she's wired, Sarah, I'd say, defending our daughter over the phone. It's beautiful. I believed that a passion, any passion, was a fire to be fed, not a strange weed to be pulled. And if her passion was understanding the very substance of our world, who was I to call that boring? I just wish our world wasn't built on the edge of the Omnichem Industrial Park. We lived in its shadow, breathed its occasional, faintly acrid air. Most days, the plumes of white steam from the cracking towers were just part of the sky, as unremarkable as real clouds. The town ran on Omnichem's paychecks, so we learned to ignore the low hum that vibrated through the ground and the weekly siren tests that had become a local joke. But this morning, the air felt different, heavier. There was a faint, metallic sweetness to it, like burnt sugar and rust, a smell that didn't belong. The usual Tuesday 10 a.m. siren never came. Instead, there was just a profound, unnerving silence, a held breath that seemed to stretch across the entire valley, waiting to be broken. My first thought was of Ilara. She was at school, of course, Northwood Elementary, less than a mile from here, and even closer to the Omnichem fence line. I grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter, my thumb hovering over her school's number in my favorites list. But before I could press it, a low, guttural rumble shook the house, so deep I felt it in my teeth. It wasn't the familiar hum of the plant. This was a sound of immense pressure releasing, a colossal groan from the earth itself. The windows rattled in their frames. Outside, a car alarm began to shriek, a frantic, lonely sound in the suffocating quiet. I ran to the living room window, the one that faced east toward the industrial park. The white plumes of steam were gone. In their place, a thick, roiling cloud of a sickly yellow-brown was unfurling from the base of the main cracking tower. It wasn't rising like steam. It was heavy, hugging the ground, pouring over the security fences like a sluggish, toxic waterfall. It moved with a purpose that felt malevolent, swallowing the landscape as it spread, erasing the familiar shapes of warehouses and access roads. The metallic sweetness in the air intensified, now laced with something acrid that made my eyes water, a chemical sting that felt like an assault. My phone buzzed in my hand. "Sarah," I answered, my voice tight. "Did you see it?" "David, what is happening?" Her voice was thin, stretched with panic. "The news. They're saying there's been an incident at the plant, an uncontrolled release. Where's Ilara?" "She's at school, Sarah. She's safe. They'll have protocols for this." The words felt hollow as soon as I said them. Protocols for a missed siren? For a cloud that looked like it was eating the world? "The school is right there," she cried. "You have to go get her, David. You have to." The line crackled, filled with a burst of static, and then went dead. "Sarah?" I shouted into the phone. Nothing. I tried to redial, but the screen just said, "No service." The network was down. The landline, I discovered a moment later, was just a dead tone. We were cut off. The key was Ilara. Getting to her, that was the only thought that mattered. I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. The school was between me and the main evacuation route out of the valley. I had to get to her first. Before I go on, before I tell you what I saw when I opened that door, what the world had become in those few short minutes, it's hard to revisit this. But this story needs to be told. People need to know what happened here, what happened to my daughter. So if you're finding your way to this, if you're listening, please hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. It means more than you can imagine. It means people are hearing us. It means her story won't be forgotten. I pulled open the front door, and the air was a physical blow. It was thick, oily, and the smell burned deep in my sinuses. The yellow-brown fog was no longer a distant threat on the horizon. It was here, creeping through the manicured lawns of my neighborhood, its tendrils snaking across the asphalt of our quiet suburban street. The world had been drained of its color, replaced with a jaundiced, terrifying filter. And through the haze I saw my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, standing frozen on his porch, staring at the cloud with wide, unblinking eyes. He was looking at the end of a normal Tuesday. I was looking at the reason my daughter's boring obsession was about to become the most important thing in the world. I slammed the car door, turned the key, and pointed the hood toward the school. Toward Ilara. The drive was a nightmare of inches. It was less than a mile, a route I could do in my sleep, but the world was gone. The fog was so dense that my headlights barely punched a few feet into the soupy, ochre gloom. I saw shapes, a discarded bicycle, an overflowing trash can, loom out of the mist and vanish. Other cars were ghost ships, some stalled in the middle of the road, doors hanging open. One had swerved and slammed into a mailbox, its horn blaring a single, unending note into the silence. There were no people. The entire neighborhood had been swallowed. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, leaning forward as if I could push the car through the toxic murk with sheer will. The chemical sting was worse inside the car, seeping through the vents. My lungs felt tight, each breath a conscious effort. I had to close my eyes for a second, fighting a wave of dizziness. Ilara. Just get to Ilara. When I reached the corner of Oak Street, where the school should have been visible, I saw it, the point of no return. It wasn't an army or a roadblock. It was the cloud itself. It was changing. The sluggish, ground-hugging fog was beginning to coalesce, to thicken in a way that defied physics. On the chain-link fence surrounding the school playground, the yellow-brown gas was crystallizing. Long, ugly, amber-colored crystals were growing on the metal, like frost in a freezer, sealing the gaps with a brittle, glassy webbing. It was happening on the stop sign, at the corner, on the metal swing set. The chemical wasn't just a gas, it was a catalyst. It was turning our world into its own prison. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt in front of the school's main entrance. The brick building was shrouded in the fog, but I could see the main double doors. A teacher, a woman I recognized as Mrs. Gable, was desperately pulling on one of the handles. It wouldn't budge. The entire metal doorframe was covered in a thick crust of the same sickly amber crystal, growing and spreading even as I watched, fusing the door to its frame. She hammered on the reinforced glass window of the door, her face a mask of terror, shouting something I couldn't hear. My blood ran cold. I threw the car into park and scrambled out, the air hitting me like a physical punch. "Ilara!" I screamed, my voice raw. I ran for the entrance, but it was useless. The doors were sealed. I pounded my fist against the glass, the impact jarring my arm. "Ilara!" And then I saw her. Through the window of a ground-floor classroom to the left of the entrance, I saw a crowd of terrified children, huddled together, some crying. Their teacher was trying to keep them calm, her own fear barely contained. But Ilara wasn't with them. She was standing by the window, her small hands pressed against the glass. She wasn't crying. Her face, pale in the jaundiced light, was a canvas of intense concentration. She wasn't looking at me. Her gaze was fixed on the amber crystals growing in a spiderweb pattern across the window pane, her lips moving silently. She was tracing the crystalline structures with her eyes, her brow furrowed. In the midst of all this horror, in the face of a world being remade into a chemical nightmare, my daughter wasn't panicking. She was analyzing. She was reading the blueprint. And in that horrifying, beautiful moment, I understood. The protocols were useless. The authorities weren't coming. The only thing that could save her, that could save any of them, was the very thing everyone else had called boring. My mind fractured. One part of me, the father, wanted to smash the glass, to tear the building apart with my bare hands to get to my child. The other, a terrified observer, was frozen by the impossible sight of the world rebuilding itself into a tomb. I stumbled back from the window, my shouts dying in my throat, which felt like it was coated in sandpaper. I had to find another way in. A side door, a service entrance, anything. I ran, stumbling through the toxic haze along the brick wall of the school. Each window I passed was the same, a beautiful, lethal lattice of amber crystal spreading across the glass, the metal frames grotesquely swollen with it. The back doors near the gymnasium were sealed shut, a solid, glittering mass of the stuff welding them to the wall. It was hopeless. The school was a sarcophagus. Panic gave way to a primal scream of frustration. As the sound tore from my lungs, a new light cut through the gloom, red and blue, strobing weakly. It was a half-block down, toward the main road. Police, authority, help. A surge of adrenaline and desperate hope propelled me forward. I ran, gasping in the thick air, my eyes fixed on the flashing lights as if they were the only solid thing left in the universe. It was a single patrol car, angled awkwardly with its front wheels in a ditch. The engine was off, but the emergency lights were still drawing power, painting the swirling yellow fog in ghostly strokes of color. I reached the driver's side window and banged on the glass. "Hello! Officer, you have to help me!" A young cop, barely older than a teenager, looked up. His face was slick with sweat, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. He rolled the window down a single inch, and a wave of static-laced panic from his shoulder radio spilled out. "Sir, you need to clear the area. This is a Class 1 containment zone. Evacuate immediately." "Evacuate where?" I yelled, gesturing wildly at the suffocating fog. "My daughter is in that school." "They're sealed inside. The chemical, it's turning to crystal. It's sealing the doors." The officer stared at me, his training warring with the unreality of the situation. He fumbled with a laminated card attached to his dashboard. "Protocol for an airborne chemical release is shelter in place," he recited, his voice trembling. "All civilians are to remain indoors and await instructions from the emergency broadcast system. The power is out. The phones are dead." I slammed my hand on the roof of his car, the sound a dull thud in the oppressive quiet. "There is no broadcast system. You have to help me get them out. Use your car. We can ram the doors." "I can't do that, sir," he said, shaking his head, shrinking back in his seat. "I have to maintain the perimeter. I have my orders." "You are the perimeter," I screamed, my voice cracking. "Look at this. There's nothing left to contain. It's here. We're in it." He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out. He had no answers. His uniform, his car, his orders, they were all artifacts from a world that no longer existed. He was just a scared kid in a metal box, waiting for a savior that wasn't coming. I saw it then. There was no plan. There was no cavalry. The tidy, organized world of rules and procedures had dissolved in the yellow-brown air, and we were left with the raw, terrifying chemistry of it all. I turned my back on him, the flashing lights feeling like a mockery. The hope I'd felt moments before curdled into a cold, hard certainty. No one was coming to save us. I walked back toward the school, the weight of that truth pressing down on me. I stopped in front of that same classroom window. Ilara was still there, her face pressed to the glass. She looked up and her eyes met mine. The fear was gone from my face, replaced by a grim resolve. I wasn't there to save her anymore. I was there to help her save us. I held my hand up to the glass, mirroring hers. She needed an assistant. Our hands, separated by the thickening glass and the growing amber frost, were a promise. In her eyes, I saw the flicker of the same fire I'd always defended. It wasn't the terror of a trapped child. It was the fierce, focused light of a scientist presented with a catastrophic, fascinating new problem. She wasn't waiting for a hero. She was formulating a solution, and she needed a lab assistant. My new purpose solidified, I turned from the window. The first step was to establish a base, a safe space. My car. It was my only shelter, my only toolkit. But as I took a step toward it, a faint, high-pitched singing sound reached my ears. It was a strange, resonant hum, like a wet finger circling the rim of a crystal glass. It was coming from my car. The amber crystallization, which had been confined to the school building, was now happening on my sedan. It started on the wheels, the metal hubcaps frosting over with a lattice of the ugly mineral. I watched, frozen in horror, as it crept up the door panels, the tendrils of crystal branching out from the door handles, and the seams where metal met metal. It was moving with an unnatural speed, consuming my last sanctuary before my eyes. I lunged for the driver's side door, but I was too late. A thick, crystalline crust had already grown over the handle, fusing it to the frame. I yanked, my fingers slipping on the glassy, sharp surface, but it was like pulling on solid rock. The singing intensified as the crystals spread across the windshield, a spiderweb of amber death racing across the glass, obscuring the interior. Within a minute, my car was no longer a car. It was a grotesque, lumpy, amber monument. I was locked out, trapped in the open. The air suddenly felt 10 times thicker, the chemical sweetness so cloying it made me gag. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and my knees buckled. I caught myself on the cold brick of the school wall, coughing, my lungs burning as if I'd inhaled fire. The crystallization process was changing the air, concentrating the poison. Time was no longer a concept. It was a physical resource, and I was running out of it with every shallow, painful breath. I pushed myself off the wall and staggered back to the classroom window, my vision tunneling. Ilara! I had to see Ilara. She was no longer at the glass. My heart seized. Then I saw her. She was standing by the large whiteboard at the front of the classroom, a dry erase marker clutched in her hand. Her teacher and the other children were huddled in the far corner, but Ilara stood alone, her back to them, her attention fixed entirely on the board. She was pointing at it, her small face a mask of desperate urgency, her eyes locked on mine. Through the encroaching amber patterns on the window, I could see what she'd written. It was a sprawling, multi-stage chemical equation, a long string of the letters and numbers that had once filled her notebooks. It was a language I didn't speak, a map of a world I couldn't comprehend. But this wasn't a doodle. This was an instruction manual. This was the blueprint for our escape. My gaze scanned the alien symbols, searching for anything familiar, anything I could hold on to. And then I saw it, near the end of the first line. NaOH. Sodium hydroxide. Lye. It was one of the first things she'd ever explained to me, showing me how it could dissolve grease and organic matter. She wasn't just analyzing the problem. She had written the answer. She had given me a recipe. Now, I just had to find the ingredients. NaOH. Sodium hydroxide. A recipe. My mind, foggy with poison and panic, latched onto those 3 letters like a drowning man grabbing a rope. Lye. Drain cleaner. Things that dissolve. I wasn't a chemist, but I was a father who had unclogged a sink. I knew what lye did. It was caustic, aggressive, hungry. It was a weapon. Laura had given me a weapon against the prison growing around her. The truth hit me then, a realization so profound it cut through my dizziness. I couldn't punch my way through this. I couldn't tear down the walls. My strength, my fury, my paternal instinct to protect, they were all useless against this enemy. The world had changed its rules, and I didn't know how to play. But Ilara did. My only role, my only path to saving her, was to stop being the hero and start being her hands. I had to trust her, completely and without question. I had to believe in the boring diagrams and the whispered incantations. I pushed off the wall, my body screaming in protest. Where would they keep it? A school, cleaning supplies, the janitor's closet. I remembered seeing a gray metal door near the gym, around the back. It was a desperate gamble, a single flicker of a thought in the toxic storm. I stumbled away from the window, away from Alara, forcing my legs to move. Every breath was a sip of acid. Black spots danced in my vision. The world was a smear of brown and yellow, the only sound my own ragged gasps and the high, crystalline singing of the world being unmade. I rounded the corner of the building. The closet door was there, tucked into an alcove. The metal handle was already beginning to frost over with amber needles. I didn't have much time. There was no lock to pick, just a heavy-duty handle with a thumb latch. I threw my shoulder against it. Nothing. Again. The metal groaned. On the third try, with a guttural roar that tore at my raw throat, the lock mechanism shattered. The door flew open. Inside, it was dark and smelled of bleach and damp mops. I fumbled along the wall for a light switch, but the power was dead. My phone was useless. Using my hands, I searched the metal shelves, my fingers brushing past spray bottles, rags, and paper towels. And then I felt it. A heavy plastic container. I dragged it into the jaundiced half-light. The label was stark white with bold red letters, Industrial Drain Opener. And below it, in the ingredients list, sodium hydroxide. I almost wept with relief. But the equation on the board had been longer than that. There were other symbols. I remembered her tracing hydrogen oxide on the car window. Water. I needed water. I grabbed a filthy mop bucket from the closet floor and scrambled back outside. A few feet away, a green garden hose was coiled around a spigot on the wall. I twisted the handle. A weak, sputtering hiss, then a pathetic trickle of brown water coughed into the bucket. It was barely anything, but it had to be enough. I poured the lye pellets into the bucket. The reaction was immediate and violent. A plume of noxious heat erupted, and the water began to boil and hiss. The bucket grew hot in my hands. This was it. This was her magic. I hoisted the sloshing, steaming bucket and began the long, agonizing journey back to the front of the school, back to her window. The amber growth was thicker now, a solid, grotesque shell over the glass, obscuring almost everything within. But as I drew closer, I could just make out a shadow on the other side, a small shape, standing right there, waiting. It was Alara. She was still there. She was waiting for her assistant. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and hope. I lifted the heavy bucket, the chemical heat warming my face. This was the moment. I took a final, searing breath and tilted the bucket to pour. The steaming, caustic liquid cascaded from the bucket, striking the amber crystal with a sound I will never forget. It was not the gentle hiss of water on a hot pan. It was a furious, violent shriek, a chemical scream of agony. The point of impact flash-boiled, releasing a thick, white, acrid cloud that was instantly distinct from the yellow fog around us. The amber crystal didn't melt. It blackened, cracked, and dissolved into a foul, bubbling sludge that ran down the brickwork like tar. It was working. My daughter's magic was real. A hole began to eat its way through the crystalline shell over the window. It was a jagged, ugly breach, but it was a breach nonetheless. Through the shimmering heat and corrosive steam, I saw her. Alara. Her face was no longer a pale shadow. It was sharp, clear, and etched with an intensity that terrified and amazed me. She wasn't looking at the dissolving prison with relief. Her eyes were wide with a new urgency. She pounded a small fist on the glass, not in panic, but to get my attention. She was pointing, but not at the hole, not at me. She was pointing frantically past me, her finger jabbing at the air, her mouth forming a word I couldn't hear but instantly understood. Look! I tore my eyes from her and turned. The world had shifted again. The monotonous yellow-brown fog was no longer a uniform cloud. From the direction of the Omnichem plant, A new wave was coming. It was a pulse of deeper, angrier color, a rolling wall of rusty orange that moved with a terrifying speed. Where it touched the existing yellow haze, the air itself seemed to shudder and condense. The high-pitched singing of the crystallization intensified, rising in octaves until it was a piercing shriek that vibrated in my bones. This wasn't just more of the same. This was a new phase, a new reaction. My blood turned to ice. The equation she'd written on the whiteboard, it was longer than just NaOH. There were plus signs, arrows, more symbols I didn't recognize. I had only seen the first step. I had brought the ingredient for the appetizer, and the main course of the catastrophe was now arriving. Her recipe wasn't just to get out. It was a counter-formula for the entire disaster. I whipped my head back to the window. The hole was now about the size of a dinner plate, the lye solution still eating away at the edges. Ilara had abandoned the whiteboard. She had a red marker in her hand and was writing directly on the interior of the glass, her letters backward, so I could read them. It was a single, stark word, underlined 3 times. Acid. My mind, already stretched to its breaking point, struggled to grasp it. Lye was a base. She needed the opposite. She needed an acid to neutralize something, or to create a new reaction to fight the oncoming orange wave. I had just used a powerful base to dissolve the crystal, and now she was demanding its chemical enemy. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, desperate. She knew what was coming. She had read the blueprint, and she was telling me, in the only language we had left, that we were out of time. She hadn't just given me the key to her cage, she had given me the first ingredient in the only antidote that could save us all, and now I had to find the next one. Acid. The word burned itself onto the back of my skull, a single command that erased everything else. The lye solution in the bucket, which moments ago had been my miracle, now felt like a half-finished sentence, a clumsy first draft. My brain, misfiring on poisoned fuel, struggled to keep up. Lye is a base. Acid is its opposite. She wasn't just dissolving the cage. She was balancing an equation I couldn't see, fighting a war on a molecular level while I was still just trying to break down a door. The adrenaline that had carried me this far evaporated, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The air was a razor in my lungs. The shrieking of the crystallizing world was the only music left. I looked from the desperate, brilliant face of my daughter to the hole I had melted in her prison, and then to the monstrous orange wave rolling toward us. It wasn't fog, it was a front, an advancing army. The yellow haze was the scout party. This was the cavalry charge. I had been so focused on saving her. I never once thought she was trying to save us. My legs, acting on an instinct I didn't know I had, turned and carried me away from the window. I wasn't her assistant anymore. I was her emissary to a world that had forgotten how to listen. I stumbled, half ran, back toward the strobing red and blue lights of the patrol car. The young officer was out of his vehicle now, his hand on his holstered weapon, staring at the approaching orange wall. The static from his radio was louder, shot through with panicked, overlapping shouts. He saw me coming and raised a hand. "Sir, I told you. Get back. We have orders to." "Your orders are obsolete," I gasped, grabbing the front of his ballistic vest, my empty bucket clattering to the asphalt. "Look at it. That's not a chemical release, it's a reaction. It's changing." He tried to push me away, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about. We're waiting for hazmat." "There's no time," I shouted, my voice raw. I let go of his vest and pointed a shaking finger back at the school. "Look at that window. The one with the hole in it. I did that." He squinted through the gloom. "What?" "My daughter. She's inside. She told me how. Sodium hydroxide. Lye. It dissolves the crystal." I sounded like a madman. I knew it. But I didn't have another language. She's a chemist. She understands what this is. She knows how to stop it. She's telling me what to do. He looked from the bubbling sludge on the wall to my wild eyes. He saw the impossible truth of the dissolved crystal. but his mind couldn't connect it to a little girl in a classroom. "Sir, you're in shock." "Acid." I screamed the word, the sound tearing from my throat. "She needs acid to fight that." I jabbed my finger toward the orange wave, so close now that it was beginning to swallow the houses at the end of the street. "Your car battery, sulfuric acid. Is that what she needs?" "I don't know, but she does." "You have to get on your radio. You have to tell them. There's a solution, but it's in that school, trapped behind crystal, and we are running out of time." Just then, his radio crackled to life with a single, clear voice overriding the panic. "All units, be advised, Phase 2 propagation has been confirmed. Repeat, Phase 2 is confirmed. All shelter-in-place protocols are void. This is not a containment situation. This is..." The voice cut out, replaced by a piercing tone. The officer stared at his radio, then at me. The word Phase 2 had broken his training. It was a variable his laminated card had not accounted for. His eyes darted from the impossible hole in the window to the apocalyptic orange tide. The system had finally caught up to the reality on the ground, and it had no answers. He looked at me, no longer a cop looking at a hysterical civilian, but a terrified man looking for a lifeline. "What?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What do we do?" "Tell them," I said, my voice a broken rasp. "Tell them Ilara needs acid." That was the moment the world pivoted. In the aftermath, after the hazmat teams in their ridiculous sealed suits finally breached the school, after the National Guard set up checkpoints, and after Omnichem's lawyers descended like vultures in tailored suits, that's the moment they all talked about. The moment a hysterical father and a terrified rookie cop became the command center for a disaster no one had prepared for. I became my daughter's voice, translating her frantic backward writing on the glass. Hydrogen sulfate from the car, HCl from the pool supply truck they located, carbon trihydride COOH from the school cafeteria's vinegar stores, into frantic commands barked over a radio. They listened, because I had the one thing their protocols and pay grades didn't, a working formula. But the victory, if you can call it that, was a Pyrrhic one. We live with Sarah now, in a sterile apartment 100 miles from the valley, which is still an amber-crusted exclusion zone. The air here is clean, but our minds are not. The nightmares are the worst. I dream of the high-pitched singing, the sound of the world turning to glass. I wake up gasping, the phantom smell of burnt sugar and rust in my nostrils, my hand reaching for a bucket that isn't there. The poetry I once saw in her passion is gone. It has been replaced by a cold, visceral dread. That sprawling glucose model I was so proud of, I smashed it to pieces a month after the incident, a sudden, violent rage overtaking me when I saw it collecting dust in a moving box. I couldn't look at it without seeing the amber lattice, the blueprint for a cage. Her passion was a fire I fed, and it saved her, but it also burned her. It branded her. Ilara is quiet again, but it's not the old quiet. It's not the hum of a mind decoding the universe. It's the silence of a soldier who has seen the front lines. She doesn't doodle in her notebooks anymore. The margins are clean. Her teachers now praise her for being, quote, focused and less distracted. And the irony is a knife in my gut. They have no idea what they're looking at. They see a normal little girl. I see a veteran. A few weeks ago, I found her sitting in the bathroom after a shower, staring at the fogged-up mirror. For a heart-stopping second, I saw the little girl from before, the one who saw magic in condensation. I held my breath, waiting for her to trace hydrogen oxide, to reclaim that little piece of her lost wonder. Instead, she just stared at her own reflection with hollow eyes. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she reached out and wiped the glass clean, smearing the canvas, erasing the possibility. She had read the universe's secret language, and it had told her a horror story. And I, the one who bought her the books, can't help but feel like I handed her the script. The quiet life we were trying to build shattered 2 months after the incident. Not with a bang, but with the polite, sterile tone of an email. The Northwood Elementary School District had completed its post-incident review. They invited us to a private meeting with the superintendent, a man named Wallace, to discuss the findings before the public town hall. Sarah and I drove there in silence. She reached over and took my hand as we pulled into the parking lot. It was the first time we'd touched without a child or a custody agreement between us in years. The conference room smelled of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Superintendent Wallace, a man with a soft handshake and eyes that never quite met ours, slid a glossy, spiral-bound report across the polished table. As you can see, he began, his voice a smooth, practiced balm. Our emergency protocols performed admirably under unprecedented circumstances. The teachers secured the children in their classrooms, just as the shelter-in-place directive requires. I stared at the cover of the report. It had the school district's logo, a cartoon owl reading a book. I felt a laugh, sharp and bitter, bubble in my chest. "Admirable," I said, my voice low. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened. "Mr. Wallace, your protocol was to lock children inside a building that was actively turning into a crystal tomb. The doors were being sealed shut by a chemical reaction. Your shelter-in-place was a death sentence." Wallace shifted in his chair, the smooth facade cracking for a fraction of a second. "The nature of the crystallization was an unforeseeable variable, Mr. Henderson. The responding officer was a terrified kid with a laminated card." I cut in, my voice rising. I leaned forward, planting my hands on the table. "He had no answers. Your system had no answers. Do you want to know who had the answer? Do you have a chapter in your glossy little report for that?" He blinked, taken aback by my tone. "I'm not sure I follow." "Ilara," Sarah said, her voice shaking but firm. "Our daughter, Ilara." I pushed the report back at him. "Your protocols didn't save those 34 children and their teachers, Mr. Wallace. My daughter did. The little girl whose file you have, the one her teachers flagged for being distracted and obsessed with chemical formulas. She stood at a window, watching the world end, and she wrote the solution on a whiteboard. She told me to get lye from the janitor's closet. She told me to get acid from a car battery. She conducted a rescue operation from inside a cage while your entire system stood outside, useless, waiting for an order that was never coming." Wallace's face went pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The truth was a weapon he had no defense for. "So here's what's going to happen," I said, the words coming out cold and hard, forged in the memory of that yellow fog. "You're going to throw this report in the trash. You are going to publicly state that the existing protocols failed and that they would have resulted in the deaths of everyone in that school. And your new protocols won't be written by bureaucrats like you. They'll be written by chemists, engineers, and physicists. And you're going to fund a new science curriculum. A real one, not rote memorization, but practical, applied science. So that the next time the world changes its rules, there's more than one person in the room who knows how to read them." He stared at me, speechless. He knew our story was out there. He knew I had the ear of every news outlet that had covered the miracle at Northwood. He knew we had him. "This isn't a negotiation," I said, standing up. Sarah stood with me. "It's the bill for services rendered by my daughter." We walked out, leaving him alone with his useless report and the truth he could no longer ignore. It wasn't a victory. It didn't fix the hollow look in Ilara's eyes, but it was a start. It was the first brick in a new foundation laid in her name. The bill was paid, but the debt remained. We lived in its shadow, 100 miles away. Sarah and I, in a truce born of shared trauma, moved into a bland, beige apartment that smelled of new paint and nothing else. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. Our weekly therapy sessions became a ritual of carefully chosen words. The therapist, a kind woman with gentle eyes, would ask Ilara about her day, and Ilara would answer in monosyllables. She was a ghost in her own life. The world had been saved by her passion, and in return, the world had stolen it from her. I saw how Sarah watched her now. Gone was the exasperation over a boring hobby. In its place was a desperate, aching need to see it again. She would buy Alara brightly colored modeling clay, leaving it on the coffee table. "Maybe you could build something," she'd suggest, her voice thin with hope. But the clay remained untouched, a vibrant monument to a joy that no longer lived here. The fire I had so proudly fed had been doused, leaving behind only the cold ash of memory. We had to reclaim something. The valley was a wound, the school a tomb, but the science was hers. It couldn't remain a weapon. One Saturday, I bought a large, clear acrylic panel and mounted it on the wall in her bedroom. Not a whiteboard, not a blackboard. Those were for schools, for lessons, for pressure. This was just a space, a canvas. "It's just for whatever," I said, handing her a set of colorful dry erase markers. Doodles, a grocery list, anything, or nothing. She took the markers and set them on her desk, and for weeks, the clear panel remained just that. A clear, empty space on her wall, reflecting a room that felt just as empty. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, it happened. It was almost 3 months to the day. I was in the kitchen, Sarah was reading on the sofa, and Alara was sitting on the floor, watching the rain streak down the glass of the patio door. The sight of it, water on glass, sent a familiar tremor of fear through me. I saw her trace a line on the steamy car window. I saw her face pressed against the crystallizing classroom pane. I walked over and sat on the floor beside her, not saying a word. We just watched the drops as they were born on the upper frame, growing heavier, then making their frantic, zigzagging run to the bottom. They would merge with others, becoming a larger, faster stream. "They always find each other," I murmured, more to myself than to her. For a long time, there was only the sound of the rain. I thought the moment had passed. Then, I heard a voice, small and fragile, like a fine-spun thread of glass. "Cohesion," Alara said. I turned to look at her. She was still watching the window, her expression unreadable. "It's the attraction between molecules that are alike," she continued, her voice gaining a sliver of its old cadence, the quiet confidence of a narrator explaining the world. "It's why the drops pull together to get bigger." She paused, and her gaze shifted, focusing on where a large drop clung stubbornly to the center of the pane. "But that's not enough. They just fall." She turned her head and looked at me, her eyes clear for the first time in months. They weren't hollow anymore. They were measuring, analyzing, seeing. "They also need adhesion," she said softly, her eyes flicking toward Sarah on the couch. "That's the force that makes them stick to the glass. To something different, you need both. Otherwise, you just fall." My breath caught in my throat. Sarah lowered her book. Alara looked back at the window, at the intricate, temporary, beautiful pattern of the rain. She hadn't just given me a science lesson. She had given us a blueprint. A new one. Not for our world, but for ours. Cohesion and adhesion. My daughter had just handed me the missing pages of the manual. I looked over at Sarah on the couch, her book forgotten in her lap, her face streaked with silent tears. For the first time in years, I didn't see my ex-wife, the other half of a fractured custody agreement. I saw my partner, my co-catalyst. We were the glass, the solid, different thing she needed to cling to. We had to hold so she wouldn't fall. That night, for the first time since the incident, the three of us ate dinner at the same table, without the suffocating weight of what we'd lost pressing down on us. The silence was still there, but it was softer now. A shared space instead of a void. A few weeks later, I came home from a grocery run to find Alara in her room, standing before the clear acrylic panel on her wall. She had a blue marker in her hand. My heart leaped into my throat. On the panel was her first drawing. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a complex equation for neutralizing a threat. It was a delicate, sprawling lattice of hexagons and pentagons, a beautiful, intricate web. Below it, she'd written the letters, octacarbon decahydride tetra nitrogen dioxide. I didn't need to ask. I recognized the reverence in her focus. This was not the grim analysis of a soldier. This was the gentle curiosity of an artist. Sarah came and stood in the doorway behind me. "What is it, sweetie?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ilara turned, a faint, shy smile touching her lips. "Theobromine," she said. "It's what makes chocolate feel good." She wasn't decoding a disaster. She was drawing the formula for comfort. That was the beginning. Theobromine was followed by C10 hydrogen nitride O. Serotonin, the molecule of well-being. Then came a sprawling, beautiful drawing of oxytocin, the bonding hormone. She drew it in blue, and next to it, in green, she drew vasopressin. A shimmering dotted red line connected the two. Below them, she wrote two words. Under the cluster of oxytocin, cohesion. Under the red line connecting them, adhesion. It wasn't a science lesson, it was a family portrait. Her passion wasn't a fire that had been extinguished. It had been refined by the blaze, burned down to its purest, most essential form. She was using her language not to describe how the world breaks, but to explain how it heals. I used to see poetry in her obsession, the blueprint for reality. I was right, but my vision was too small. I only saw the recipes for rock and rain, for the physical world. I didn't see the rest. The force that holds a family together after it has been shattered. The attraction that pulls two lonely people back into a shared orbit. The chemical reaction that turns a house into a home again. That's a blueprint too. That's the most fundamental chemistry of all. Ilara didn't lose her gift in the yellow fog. She discovered its true purpose. She's not just reading the universe's secret language anymore. She's teaching it to us. She's teaching us how to be whole. Her story, our story, needed to be told. It's the formula for how we survived. If you agree, if you think voices like hers matter in this world, please hit that like button, subscribe. It means more than you know. It means the signal is getting through.